Okay, let's unpack this. You know that feeling in a dream where something totally bizarre is happening and you're just like scrambling to make sense of it?
Uh-huh.
I had one recently where I was being pelted by eggs. Just endless eggs, splattering everywhere, felt chaotic, completely out of my control.
Weird.
Yeah. Then, flipping through our source material, I saw this other image. Very different, but also unsettling. A young patient in the ER seemed okay, and then just gone.
Wow. Yeah, that's stark.
Right, that sudden loss. And both things, the dream and that real moment from the book, they kind of hit this nerve, feeling overwhelmed by stuff we can't understand or prevent.
And that feeling, that's exactly what people often feel with health information, right?
Yeah.
Just bombarded like those eggs.
Exactly. Information overload, especially with health. And that's precisely what we want to tackle for you today.
It taps right into that basic need, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Wanting to understand, wanting some control over, well, life and health.
Totally. And that's why we're doing this deep dive. You, our listener, you sent in some great stuff, and we've really zeroed in on one big one. Outlive, The Science and Art of Longevity. It's by Peter Attia and Bill Gifford.
It's a hefty book. A real deep dive in itself, actually. Very forward thinking.
It really is. So our mission today, pull out the most important ideas, the stuff that can genuinely shift how you think about your long-term health. But without getting totally lost in every single tiny detail.
Yeah, aiming for the big picture shifts, the core concepts you can actually use.
Right. It's about getting that framework for understanding, longevity. And the authors kick off with two concepts that are just fundamental. You have to get these.
Okay, lay them out.
First, lifespan. Simple enough, right?
No.
How many years you're actually alive.
Got it, the number.
But then second, and this is arguably like the more important one, health span.
Ah, yes. Health span. The quality of those years, how well you're actually living them.
Exactly. How well your mind and body are working. And the authors, they really push back on the standard definition, the kind of weak one.
But
just being free from, diagnosed disease or major disability. They say that's not enough.
Right, because think about it. Say you've got a 50-year-old, goes to the doc, clean bill of health. No specific diseases.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, but could that 50-year-old really keep up with a healthy 20-year-old? Run as fast?
Right.
Recover the same? Think as sharply? Maybe. Probably not.
Good point. So technically healthy, but definitely not the same functional capacity.
Precisely. And that's the nuance with health span. It's not just avoiding death. It's about living with real vitality, real capability for as long as possible.
Okay, that distinction is crucial. Lifespan, health span. Got it. So with that locked in, let's get into what the authors call, it sounds a bit intense, the 4 horsemen of slow death.
Hey, yeah, dramatic framing, but powerful. It focuses the mind on the main threats.
So what are they?
They identify these 4 big ones: heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's and type 2 diabetes, plus related metabolic issues.
And these are basically the main things that, shorten life and health span in the modern world.
Overwhelmingly so. And the key insight, the really critical part, is that these aren't usually sudden lightning strikes.
Right. They call them slow deaths because they creep up on you. They often start developing silently, sometimes for decades, before you even get a diagnosis or have a big event.
Think about that sudden heart attack example you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
The underlying problem, the atherosclerosis, that plaque buildup, that's likely been progressing for 20, maybe 30 years.
Yeah.
Silently.
That's kind of terrifying, actually.
It is, and it highlights this fundamental mismatch. Our current medical system, what the book calls Medicine 2.0, is amazing at some things.
Yeah, like emergencies. If you have that heart attack or a bad infection or break a leg, Medicine 2.0 is brilliant. They're great at catching the eggs, as the book puts it.
Exactly. Acute care, fantastic. They can often save your life in those moments.
But, and this is the big but, we're much less good at stopping the eggs from falling off the building in the first place.
Right. Preventing these chronic diseases, these slow burns, from taking hold over those silent decades. That's the gap.
And that's where this idea of Medicine 3.0 comes in, a different approach.
A proactive approach.
Yeah.
Look at type 2 diabetes again, the standard diagnosis. It often comes when your HbA1c hits 6.5% or more.
Okay.
But by that point, the underlying problem, that metabolic dysfunction, your body struggling with blood sugar, that's been going on for a long time already. Years, potentially.
So Medicine 2.0 often waits for the alarm bells to ring really loudly before stepping in.
Pretty much. Medicine 3.0 aims to intervene much, much earlier.
Okay, so if that's 2.0, what came before? The book gives a quick history lesson, right?
Yeah, it's helpful context. Medicine 1.0, that's the ancient stuff. Think Hippocrates. Lots of observation trying to understand the body, but, honestly, limited effectiveness in actually fixing things.
Oh, right. More observation than intervention. Then came the revolution. Medicine 2.0.
Huge leap. Science enters the picture. Germ theory, Semmelweis. Lister realizing invisible things cause disease.
Game changer.
Totally. And then rigorous testing, randomized controlled trials, people like Bacon pushing for evidence, and of course breakthroughs like penicillin.
Suddenly, we could actually cure things. Infections, diseases that used to kill routinely.
It completely transformed human health, tackled those acute killers incredibly successfully. It was all about evidence-based treatments for specific, often sudden, illnesses.
But like we said, not as great for the slow, chronic stuff, the Four Horsemen. Which brings us back to Medicine 3.0. What really defines this newer approach?
Okay, core principles. Number one, it's fundamentally about prevention, not just reacting.
Building that better roof, like you said.
Exactly. Instead of just getting dry after it starts raining.
Yeah.
Medicine 3.0 is about understanding your individual risks way ahead of time and intervening proactively. Building a better roof, a more seaworthy boat, whatever analogy works. It's a mindset shift.
Makes total sense. Don't wait for the high blood sugar act decades before. What else?
Second big thing, personalization.
Yeah.
Medicine 2.0 often relies on averages from big clinical trials. What works for the average patient.
Right, but we're not all average.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Medicine 3.0 recognizes we're all unique. Different genes, different lifestyles, different environments. So the goal is to tailor prevention and treatment strategies much more specifically to you, the individual, moving away from one size fits all.
That sounds much smarter for these complex long-haul conditions. It must be more effective.
That's the idea. And inherent in that personalization is a much longer time horizon.
Ah, right. You mentioned that.
Medicine 2.0 might look at your 10-year risk for a heart attack. Medicine 3.0, if you're, say, 40, it needs to be thinking about your 30 or 40-year risk profile. Diseases that take decades require looking decades ahead.
Wow, okay. That's a huge shift in perspective. So what about the patient's role in all this? Has that changed too?
Absolutely. This isn't passive. Medicine 3.0 demands a much more active, engaged patient, meaning you need to get informed. Become, reasonably medically literate. You need to be clear on your own goals. What does a healthy, long life look like to you? And you need to understand your real risks.
So it takes effort from the patient. Willingness to learn, maybe change habits.
Exactly. You become a partner in the process, an active collaborator, not just someone receiving instructions. It might mean stepping outside your comfort zone.
That's empowering, though, being a collaborator in your own longevity plan. Okay, so let's link this back to lifespan and health span. The book mentions this thing called the marginal decade. What's that about?
Yeah, the marginal decade. It's an interesting concept. It highlights a potential downside of Medicine 2.0's success, actually.
How so?
By just extending lifespan, by keeping people alive longer without necessarily improving their health during those extra years. Medicine 2.0 can sometimes inadvertently stretch out that period at the very end of life that's marked by more sickness, more frailty, more disability.
Oof. So adding years, but potentially low-quality years. That's not the goal.
Definitely not the goal. And they contrast this with centenarians, people living past 100.
What's different about them?
Well, studies suggest that many centenarians experience a much shorter period of significant disability right before they die. They tend to stay relatively functional, physically and mentally, for a much bigger chunk of their very long lives.
So they compress that period of decline into a much smaller window at the end.
Exactly, and that's really the aim of Medicine 3.0.
Yeah.
Not just more years, but compressing that morbidity, maximizing the health span.
That really clarifies it. Okay, makes sense. Now, why hasn't evolution just, fixed this for us? Why do we still get these diseases of aging?
Good question. From an evolutionary biology standpoint, it's pretty clear. Natural selection mainly cares about stuff that affects our ability to reproduce successfully.
Right, passing on genes.
Yeah. And things like Alzheimer's, heart disease, most cancers, they typically hit us hard after our prime reproductive years are over. So there wasn't strong evolutionary pressure to weed out the genes that might make us susceptible later in life.
Evolution just doesn't care if we get frail when we're 80, as long as we had kids when we were 30.
Pretty much. As the book says, natural selection doesn't care if we develop Alzheimer's disease or baldness in old age.
Huh. Okay, sobering but logical. Means we have to be proactive ourselves. The book uses the APOE gene as an example of genetic influence, right?
Yes, perfect example. APOE helps manage cholesterol. It comes in different versions alleles. There's E2, E3, and E4.
And they have different effects.
Big time. The E4 version, if you inherit it, significantly increases your risk for Alzheimer's disease. It's a major risk factor.
Oh.
But the E2 version, that seems to be protective against dementia and is often linked with living longer. So the author actually mentions testing patients for their ATOE type. It's valuable personalized risk info.
It really shows genetics play a part, but it's not all genetics, right? The book stresses that.
Oh, absolutely not. Genetics are part of the puzzle, but just one part. Longevity is super complex. It's genes interacting with environment and, crucially, with our behaviors, the choices we make every single day.
So we can't change our genes, but we can change a lot of other stuff.
Exactly. And the fact that you see some centenarians who maybe smoked a bit or enjoyed a drink, it shows there isn't just one single path. It's complicated. There are likely multiple ways to get there.
So don't just copy your 100-year-old grandpa's cigar habit and expect the same result.
Please don't. But the big idea is that a lot of the decline, the frailty, the diseases we associate with getting older, they're tied to the fundamental biological process of aging itself.
Okay, that's key. It's not just random bad luck hitting us.
Right. Medicine 3.0 argues that these chronic diseases are often manifestations of aging. So the most powerful approach isn't just chasing each disease after it appears, but trying to address the aging process itself, slow it down, delay the negative impact.
Target aging to prevent the diseases.
Got it.
All right.
Okay, so we've got the horseman, the medicine evolution, lifespan versus health span, aging. Now the practical stuff. The book lays out 5 main areas, the tactics. Yeah, the 5 domains where we can potentially intervene. These are the levers we can pull. They are exercise, nutrition, sleep, emotional health, and then what they call exogenous molecules.
Exogenous molecules, like...
Drugs, hormones, supplements, things you take from outside the body.
Okay. So 5 big areas. What do they say about nutrition initially?
Well, what's interesting is they start with the quantity of food, how much you eat, overall calories. They frame that as like the first order thing to consider.
Before getting into what kinds of food, like keto versus vegan versus whatever.
Yeah, exactly. They argue that energy balance, not eating too much, not too little, finding that kind of Goldilocks zone for you is paramount. The debates about specific diets come later.
Interesting. Calories first,
Okay.
and exercise.
Non-negotiable. Absolutely foundational. They make it crystal clear that exercise is a critical pillar for any longevity strategy. They don't dive deep into what kind right away, but its importance is stressed heavily.
Makes sense. Then sleep and emotional health, also crucial, I assume.
Hugely. The book flags them as vital, but saves the deeper dive for later chapters. They acknowledge how interconnected they are with physical health and aging.
Right, you can't ignore stress or bad sleep. And finally, those exogenous molecules. Drugs, supplements.
Yeah, they basically say, this is complex, we'll get to it. They acknowledge potential roles, but emphasize it needs a very careful, science-based, personalized approach, not just randomly popping pills.
Okay, so lots of potential tools.
Yeah.
But this brings us back to that challenge we started with, information overload and needing personalized strategies.
Totally. And they have this great little story to illustrate the danger of bad data or misinterpreting data.
Oh, yeah.
They imagine, like epidemiologists visiting from Saturn. They know nothing about humans. They try to figure out longevity just by reading celebrity gossip mags about centenarians.
Ah. What do the Saturn aliens conclude?
Their conclusion. The secret to long life must be eating Denny's breakfast specials and smoking cigars. Because that's what some famous old person reportedly did.
That's brilliant. It perfectly shows how easy it is to confuse correlation with causation if you're not careful.
Exactly. It hammers home why we need rigorous science, not just anecdotes. They mention tools like Mendelian randomization, using genetic variations to get closer to understanding cause and effect, overcoming some limits of just observing people.
So we need good science, and we need to remember it's personal.
Absolutely. It loops back to that core theme.
Yeah.
The best diet, the best exercise plan, it varies. It depends on your unique biology, your goals, your starting point. No single answer fits everyone.
Okay. So wrapping up this first look at Outlive, what's the main shift in thinking we should take away?
I think the biggest thing is moving from being reactive, waiting for sickness, then treating it to being proactive, intentionally building a longer and healthier life, taking control of the aging process as much as we can.
And remembering it's not just about the number of years, the lifespan. It's the quality, the vitality, the function, the health span that really matters for living well.
Yeah, and the empowering part is, while genes play a role, so much is actually in our hands. Adopting that medicine 3.0 mindset, getting informed, making conscious choices, it can genuinely change your future health trajectory.
It really can. Understanding those four horsemen, knowing the 5 domains we can work on, exercise, nutrition, sleep, emotional health, maybe molecules later, even small steps in those areas can make a huge difference down the line.
Absolutely. Which leads to maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Okay, leave us with something to think about.
Thinking about those 5 domains: exercise, nutrition, sleep, emotional health, molecules. Which one feels like the lowest hanging fruit for you right now? Where's the biggest opportunity for a positive change? What's one small, informed step you could actually take, maybe this week, towards building that longer, healthier health span? Remember, it's not about, frantically catching falling eggs anymore. It's about designing a stronger building in the first place.